So I'm going to be talking about how to write good letters to the editor, which is of interest to two different groups: people who actually want to write letters to the editor themselves, and people who have to edit letters to the editor and figure out which ones they want to put in the paper and which ones not, and how they might want to work with the people who have written the letters in order to make them better. So in any enterprise, a good place to start out when you're trying to figure out how to do it is to ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish? And in thinking about this topic, I asked myself that question, and I could come up with 4 different basic ideas of why it is that people write letters to the editor. And there could be more. You know, one of you could come up with one, or other people watching the video might come up with one. And if so, then they can think about them and perhaps analyze them according to some of the principles that I'm going to use to discuss the ones I came up with. The 4 categories I came up with are simple presentation of facts, persuasion, preaching to the choir, and primal scream therapy. And with regard to all these categories, it seems to me, again, the first question you want to ask is, what's the audience? Who are you talking to in undertaking any one of these enterprises? Because in order to figure out what to say and how to say it, you have to know who you're talking to and what kind of thing you have to say to that person in order to produce the result that you want with that audience. So to start out with, presentation of facts is obviously the simplest. It's actually relatively rare that we get a letter that's just trying to present facts in a disinterested way. It happens every once in a while. Normally when people are presenting facts, and it looks like that's all they're doing, they're presenting facts which in fact they think are so persuasive that they actually don't have to tell the audience anything more than the facts, and the audience will, draw the conclusion they want. So a lot of the time presentation of facts is just a kind of a stealth way of doing a persuasion letter, and I actually find it extremely effective, and I wish more people would use it, because there are times the less said, the better. And sometimes you can just give the people, these are the facts, A, B, C, D, but these people over here are saying, E makes no sense. And respect your audience enough that they'll be able to figure it out, that this thing is ridiculous. With presentation of facts, the main thing to worry about is reliable sourcing. I'm not going to go into great detail on that here, but just briefly, if you present a fact in a letter to the editor that has not been presented in the newspaper, or is not a matter of very common knowledge, there should be sourcing of some sort or another, and ideally you want to go to professional journals, mainstream journalism, government websites, that kind of thing. Obviously, blog posts or somebody said to me or whatever like that is not going to be effective. So that's basically it on presenting facts, and I mentioned that one first because, of course, presenting facts will be the basis for at least persuasion and preaching to the choir. Primal scream therapy is another question. And I might as well just do primal scream therapy next to get it out of the way. If you're presenting facts, your audience is everybody. So you're talking to everybody and you just want to present them clearly, and if your sourcing is persuasive, hopefully everybody will accept that that's a fact. With primal scream therapy, I mean, has everybody here heard of primal scream therapy? You know it. Who's your audience?
Yourself.
It's yourself! And you're going to send that to a newspaper and expect them to print it? So I understand primal scream therapy letters. I think I've probably even done some of them myself. But don't expect, it's completely understandable for people to feel very strongly about things, to be outraged, to think that they're so awful that nothing they can say seems awful enough to describe it, and they throw out their epithets and their insults and their libel and anything else that they have to say, and to send it to a newspaper editor. But you cannot expect it to be printed, partly because, especially if it is libelous, the newspaper is not going to undertake that risk. You shouldn't undertake that risk for yourself. But in addition, just in terms of the newspaper enterprise as being something that has to worry about its readers, we serve our readers. We're interested in them hearing something that will inform them or engage them or, be positive for the community in some way. They don't need to hear other people's primal screams. So by all means, if people want to write those letters, that's great, and I think it probably does provide good therapy, but don't expect it to go in the paper, and if you're a newspaper editor, don't put it in. So now let's go down to what me is the most interesting category, actually, which is persuasion. And because this is the thing that I think people misunderstand most often. I think most letters to the editor, in fact, are written with the idea of persuasion in mind. And people forget that when you're trying to persuade people, your audience is people who disagree with you. It's people who disagree with you or who are neutral and haven't formulated an opinion on the issue. And for this reason, obviously, if you're trying to address somebody who disagrees with you, it's probably not a good idea, for instance, to ridicule everybody who disagrees with you, or to insult them, or to question their motives, or their character, or their personality, which is all of which falls under the heading of ad hominem attack. Ad hominem meaning at or to the man. And the point is that instead of addressing the substance of the issues that somebody has raised, instead of pointing out maybe that something they say is a fact is not a fact, or that their reasoning is invalid from one point to another, it's questioning their motivations, saying they're greedy, they're only doing it because they want money, whatever that kind of stuff. It's just not effective when you're trying to persuade. There is, and I believe that there's an overall structure to arguments of persuasion, which has to do with first establishing a set of shared goals or values. That's the background. If you can't establish a background of shared goals or values with the people who disagree with you, it's very unlikely you're going to get them to shift over. So they think you start out on different ground. You first establish your background of shared goals and values. Then you go to presenting your facts, well-sourced, so that they're not inclined to say, well, you know, where did that come from? They just made that up, or whatever. And then just apply reason to go to your conclusion. That's it. It's very simple. But so, you know, the letters of persuasion, avoid insults and ad hominem attacks. Remember that the people you're talking to either disagree with you or are neutral. And the thing is, even neutral people, you may not be insulting them directly or saying bad things about them, but for the most part, people don't like nasty. They're not attracted to nasty. Now, there is an exception that we're going to get into in preaching to the choir. Unfortunately, people sometimes do like nasty. But if they're neutral, they don't like nasty, and it's not going to help you persuade the neutrals really any more than it's going to help you persuade the people who are against you. So that's basically it on persuasion. Now we come to kind of the trickiest one, which is preaching to the choir. And preaching to the choir is frequently used as kind of a denigrating phrase of like, why bother? Because of course the audience of preaching to the choir is, you're talking to the people who agree with you, so why bother? But Michael Moore, I think, had a very good quote on why it is that we preach to the choir. He said, that's how you make them sing. So especially in a newspaper where you're talking about civic issues, and maybe you want people to go out and vote, or write letters to their congressmen or their representatives or something like that. There are absolutely times when you don't need to persuade the people that you're talking to, but you want to get to the people who agree with you and say, hey, it's time to act, it's time to do something. That's preaching to the choir, and to me it's a very legitimate reason to write a letter to the editor. In terms of being the person who has to edit that type of letter, though, it's a little less easy than persuasion, because persuasion, they're just black and white people, black and white reasons to tell people this, you know, the nasty isn't good, the attacks aren't good, and all that stuff. This gets to when people like nasty. Unfortunately, people generally do like nasty when they're all getting together to hate somebody else. And like in 1984, remember the hate in 1984 when everybody got together for an hour to hate Oceania or whichever one it was that they were at war with then. So I think it's probably harder to discourage letter writers from doing this kind of, you know, vitriolic criticism in preaching to the choir letters, because sadly, given human nature, it actually can work. However, you know, even there are issues. If you'd like to attract any neutrals, you can. You do have a tendency to get into libel, which of course is not going to fly. And just generally, there is another option, which is instead of focusing on all the other people out there that you hate with regard to a certain issue, you can, again, focus on the common goals and values or whatever it is, and try to encourage the people that you're trying to talk to in a more positive way.